Ladies and gentlemen, you ever notice how the scariest part about a narcissist isn't when you're with them? It's when God finally pulls you out. See, while you're in it, you think they're winning. You think they've got control, but the real ending, the one they can't escape, that's what's terrifying. Not for you, but for them. You ever notice how sometimes we call something an accident or a coincidence, but deep down we know it wasn't? That's how separation from a narcissist works. You didn't just stumble out of that situation. You didn't just suddenly wake up one morning and decide you had the strength to walk. No, God pulled you out. And if you think about it, you probably didn't even see all the strings he was pulling at the time. You just felt the ground shift. Conversations started changing. People started speaking into your life. Things that once seemed impossible, like leaving, suddenly started to line up. That's not chance. That's protection. See, when you were with them, you thought you were holding it together. You thought that by managing their moods, by keeping the peace, by constantly trying to fix, smooth over, explain, or justify, you were keeping the whole thing from crashing down. But the truth is, you were the one keeping them afloat. And because of that, you didn't realize how much danger you were actually in. It wasn't just emotional danger. It was spiritual. It was your peace. It was your joy. It was your identity on the line. And if you had stayed, it would have drained you dry. That's why separation wasn't rejection. It was rescue. Think about it. How many times did you pray for a sign? How many nights did you beg for clarity, for relief, for a way out? And then at just the right time, something happened that created space. Maybe it was an argument that finally broke the cycle. Maybe it was someone who stepped in and reminded you of your worth. Maybe it was a door opening somewhere you didn't expect. That wasn't just a random chain of events. That was God saying, enough. I'm pulling you out before they destroy what I built in you. And here's the part that stings when you look back. While you were in it, you thought you were losing. You thought walking away meant failure, meant weakness, meant giving up. But now you can see it for what it really was. The hand of God moving pieces you couldn't move yourself. Separation was the shield you didn't know you needed. Because if you had stayed, you would have been stuck in that endless loop of trying to satisfy someone who could never be satisfied and trying to heal someone who didn't want to be healed. You know what else? The narcissist saw it too. Maybe not in the way you did, but they felt it. They felt the shift the moment God started to move you out. That's why they tried harder at the end. Harder to guilt you, harder to manipulate you, harder to pull you back in. They weren't fighting for love. They were fighting for control, and when control slipped, panic set in. That's why they lash out. That's why they smear your name. That's why they scramble to rewrite the story, because the scariest thing for them is the realization that someone greater than them just overruled their game. So let's call it what it is. Separation wasn't punishment. It wasn't abandonment. It was divine protection over your life. It was God saying, I have more for you than this small suffocating box you've been living in. And if you ever doubt it, just look at who you're becoming since leaving. Look at the weight that's lifted. Look at the peace you're beginning to feel. Even if it's still new, even if it's still fragile, that's evidence of protection. That's proof you were never alone, even when you felt invisible. Because here's the truth. Narcissists don't release people willingly. They hold on until something stronger than them forces a break. And that something wasn't you. That something was God stepping in, breaking chains you didn't have the strength to break on your own, and giving you a freedom you thought you'd never taste. And once you see it like that, you realize separation wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning. Here's the thing about narcissists. Their entire world runs on control. That's their fuel. That's their oxygen. And the second you stop feeding it, the second you stop giving them the reaction, the attention, the constant reassurance, their whole system starts to break down. See, it's not just that they want control. It's that without it, they don't know who they are. And that's why losing you wasn't just losing a relationship for them. It was losing their lifeline. When you were with them, you probably felt it, that constant pressure to perform, to keep them happy, to read the room before they walked into it. It was like carrying a weight that never shifted, never got lighter. And you told yourself that if you just did enough, if you just said the right thing, if you just stayed patient, maybe they would finally calm down, maybe they would finally treat you the way you deserved. But you learned the hard way that moment never came, because control doesn't have a finish line. It doesn't stop once they've gotten enough. It's never enough. And here's where it gets scary for them. The moment you step out, The moment you stop responding the way they want, the power dies. It doesn't matter how loud they get, how manipulative they get, how convincing they try to sound. If you don't hand over your peace, they can't take it. And deep down, they know that. That's why when God pulled you out, the narcissist didn't just lose a partner, a friend, or a family member. They lost their supply. The very thing they relied on to make themselves feel powerful, important, superior. Think about it. Every time you comforted them, after they created chaos, every time you apologized just to keep the peace, every time you bent over backwards to meet their impossible standards, you were unknowingly feeding that control. You were their mirror reflecting back the image they wanted to see. Without you, that mirror is gone. Now they're standing there with nothing but their own emptiness staring back at them. That's why they spiral when you leave. That's why they scramble to find someone else. Why they try to replace you overnight. Why they launch smear campaigns to make themselves look like the victim. Because control doesn't survive in silence. It doesn't survive in truth. It only survives in reaction. And once you're gone, they have nothing left to react to. That's the beginning of their downfall. But let me tell you the part that should give you peace. They didn't lose because you fought harder than them. They lost because you stopped playing. And that's the one thing they can't handle. See, narcissists thrive on pulling people into the fight, into the drama, into the back and forth. They bait you, and when you bite, they win. But the second you step back, the second you refuse to engage, their power has nowhere to land. It just fizzles out, and that is their greatest fear. Now, from your side, it doesn't always feel like that. Sometimes it feels like they're still winning. They may move on quickly. They may look like they're thriving. They may still try to poke at you from a distance. But make no mistake, the appearance of control isn't the same as actually having it. Deep down, they know the truth. They know they lost the one thing they can't get back. Your willingness to hand over your peace, and once that's gone, no replacement, no new relationship, no fake smile on social media will ever give it back to them. And this is why the end of their story is so terrifying, because what they built their entire life on, control, manipulation, dominance, crumbles when they run out of people willing to play the game. And slowly but surely that day comes. For you, separation was freedom. For them, separation was exposure. Because when a narcissist loses what they can't control, they lose everything. Here's the thing about narcissists. They are masters of masks. They build an image so polished, so convincing, that even you start to believe it. At first, you buy into the charm, the confidence, the way they seem to always have the right words, the right smile, the right answers. And for a while, you think maybe this person really is who they say they are. But over time, you start to notice the cracks. You see the inconsistencies, the double standards, the moments when their mask slips and the anger, the insecurity, the cruelty bleeds through. And once you've seen behind the mask, you can't unsee it. The problem is when you're in it, you convince yourself those cracks are your imagination. You explain it away. You tell yourself they're just stressed. They didn't mean it. It's not who they really are, because you want so badly for the person they pretended to be. The charming, loving, put-together version to be the real one. You cling to that mask because it's easier than facing the reality. But here's the truth. The mask was never them. The mask was the sales pitch. The mask was the trap. And when God separates you, that mask loses its audience. Think about it. Who are they performing for if you're not there? Who's buying the act? If the one person who knew them best isn't around to validate it anymore, without you holding up the stage lights, the show gets darker. The mask starts slipping faster, and people around them begin to notice what you always tried to ignore. That's the terrifying part for a narcissist. They can't live without the mask, but they also can't keep it intact forever. The pressure of holding up a false identity always builds until it breaks. And when it breaks, their whole world unravels. Because the truth about a narcissist is this: there is no core self underneath. There's just emptiness. That's why they cling so desperately to the mask. Because with that, they'd have to face who they really are. And that's a reality they can't stomach. You probably remember moments when the mask cracked in private. Those sudden bursts of rage over something small. The way they belittle you when no one was watching. The double life they tried to maintain. One image for the world and a completely different reality at home. And you remember how quickly they could snap back into character when someone else walked into the room? That switch wasn't real. It was survival. They needed you to believe the mask so you'd keep covering for them, keep explaining for them, keep holding it in place when it slipped. But when you walked away, that safety net was gone. And here's where their downfall begins. Because you know their truth. You've seen what's behind the mask. And no matter how hard they try to rewrite the story, they can't erase what you lived through. You carry a truth they can't control, and that terrifies them. They may try to smear you, to flip the script, to convince others that you were the problem, but deep down they know it's only a matter of time before others start seeing what you already saw. The scariest part for them is the inevitability of exposure. They can keep up the act for a while, but eventually their inconsistencies catch up with them. People get tired of the manipulation. Friends, coworkers, even new partners begin to notice the cracks. The mask becomes harder and harder to wear, heavier with every lie, every false smile, every performance. And slowly, their carefully built image collapses. For you, this realization is freedom. It means you no longer question your own reality. You no longer wonder, was it me? Did I imagine it? No, you saw the mask crack, and you know the truth for them, though. It's the beginning of the end, because without the mask, they're exposed. Without the mask, they're powerless. Without the mask, they're forced to face themselves. And that's the one thing they'll never be able to survive. Because no matter how long they fight to keep it in place, the mask always cracks. Loneliness is the one thing a narcissist can't handle, yet it's the very thing that always catches up to them. See, when you were in their life, you were the buffer. You were the one absorbing the blows, filling the silence, keeping the emptiness from creeping in. Even in the middle of chaos, they always had someone there to orbit around, someone to feed their ego, someone to keep them from being left alone with themselves. But when God pulled you out, all of that went with you. The spotlight dimmed, the stage emptied, and what's left for them is something they've spent their whole lives trying to outrun: isolation. Now at first, they'll fight it. They'll scramble to replace you. They'll look for new supply, someone else to pull into their orbit as quickly as possible. You've probably seen it happen, how fast they move on, how desperate they are to prove they're not alone, how loudly they perform for the world. So it looks like they're thriving. But make no mistake, that's not strength. That's panic. That's survival mode. Because the truth is, narcissists are terrified of being alone. Not just in the sense of being without company, but in the deeper sense of being without a shield from their own emptiness. See, loneliness for you might bring clarity. It might bring healing. It might give you space to finally breathe, to rediscover who you are, to connect with God and your purpose again. But for them, loneliness isn't healing. It's haunting, because when the noise quiets down, when there's no one to argue with, no one to manipulate, no one to gaslight, they're left with themselves. And that's a prison they can't escape. It's why they're so restless. It's why they keep moving from one person to the next, one distraction to another, one mask to the next, because stillness exposes the truth. And the truth is, they don't like who they are. Without someone there to reflect back the image they're trying to project, they're forced to look at the brokenness they've been covering up all along. That's why their relationships never last. That's why they burn bridges everywhere they go, because they can't sit in loneliness, but they also can't maintain real connection. So what's left? A cycle of temporary highs, followed by inevitable emptiness. And here's the part they'll never admit. Losing you wasn't just losing a person. It was losing the shield that kept their loneliness at bay. They may act like they don't care. They may act like you were disposable. But when the doors close and the crowd goes home, they feel the silence. They feel the weight of your absence. And they know deep down that every person who leaves them is another confirmation of what they've tried to deny their whole life. That no mask, no manipulation, no performance can keep someone forever for you. That's vindication. That's peace. Because you can see now that the very thing they feared most, being left alone, is exactly what their behavior led to. God didn't just separate you to protect you. He also allowed their own actions to create their consequences. They sowed manipulation, control, lies, and abuse. And what they reap in the end is isolation. And here's why that's so terrifying for them. Because eventually the replacements run out. The charm wears thin. The stories don't work anymore. People catch on, and what's left is the thing they never wanted to face. The silence of their own life. That silence becomes their prison. It's not that they don't know how to fill it. It's that nothing they use to fill it ever satisfies. Not new people, not attention, not fake success, not appearances. None of it lasts. And in the quiet moments when nobody's watching, they're left with the one companion they can't manipulate, can't control, can't escape themselves. And that's a fate they can't run from. Because in the end, loneliness becomes their prison. Freedom looks different when you've spent years in chains you couldn't see at first. You don't even realize you're free. You just feel the absence of something heavy. The silence feels strange. The calm feels suspicious. You keep waiting for the other shoe to drop because for so long, that's what life with a narcissist trained you to expect. But then slowly you notice the shift. You laugh a little easier. You breathe a little deeper. You start remembering who you were before their voice took up all the space in your head. And in that moment, you begin to understand something that shakes a narcissist to their core. Your freedom is the one thing they can't control. See, their entire world was built on having access to you. Your reactions, your attention, your forgiveness, your willingness to explain yourself again and again. That was their power. And as long as you stayed in that cycle, they could convince themselves they were in control. But the second you walked out, the second God pulled you from their grip, that illusion shattered. Because what they fear more than anything isn't you leaving, it's you healing. Healing is the real loss for them. When you heal, you stop needing their approval. When you heal, you stop responding to their bait. When you heal, you stop carrying the guilt they handed you like it was your responsibility. And every step you take in that direction, every piece of yourself you reclaim, is a reminder to them that they no longer hold the keys. That loss of access, that loss of control, is devastating to someone whose entire identity depends on being the center of someone else's universe. That's why they try so hard to pull you back in. That's why they launch smear campaigns, why they show up suddenly acting changed, why they try to provoke you, even from a distance. It's not about love. It's not about closure. It's about access. They don't want you back. They want your freedom back, under their control. Because when you walk in freedom, you prove their greatest fear true. They are not as powerful as they pretended to be. And here's the part that makes your story so powerful. Your freedom doesn't just heal you, it exposes them. People start to see the difference between who you are now and who you were when you were under their influence. They see the lightness in you, the peace returning to you, the confidence that was buried for so long. That contrast tells the truth louder than any lie. They can spread, they can talk, they can twist, they can accuse. But your freedom speaks louder. Your healing speaks louder. You may not realize it, but every step forward you take is a kind of judgment on them. Not because you're out to destroy them, but because your growth highlights what they've lost. It proves they never broke you the way they thought they did. It proves they never had the kind of control they believed they had. And it proves that the story doesn't end with them. It continues with you. Now let's be honest, walking in freedom isn't easy. It's messy. You'll have days where you still hear their voice echoing in your head. Days where you question yourself. Days where you feel tempted to fall back into old patterns. But the difference now is that you recognize those thoughts for what they are, echoes of a prison you've already walked out of. And every time you choose peace over chaos, truth over lies, healing over hurt, you step further and further into the freedom that terrifies them. And here's what you need to hold on to. That freedom isn't just survival, it's victory. It's not just you making it out. It's you proving that God's protection over your life is stronger than their manipulation. They can't rewrite that. They can't undo that. They can't reach into the space you've been pulled into. And no matter how much they try to regain access, the door is closed. The chain is broken. the control is gone. Because at the end of the story, your freedom is their greatest fear. When you look at the end of a narcissist story, it's not the picture they wanted to paint. They thought they'd always win. They thought they'd always have control. They thought the mask would never crack, that loneliness would never catch up, and that you'd never truly be free. But God had other plans. He separated you. He protected you. He exposed them, and He gave you back your life. So now the ending isn't scary for you. It's scary for them because while they spiral in the weight of their own choices, you're walking in peace. They can't touch, healing, they can't stop, and freedom they can't take away. And that's the power of being rescued. Their ending is fear.